Welcome to Void of Fears. I've been checking my analytics, and I noticed that 46.5% of you watching right now aren't subscribed yet. We're on the journey to 10k subscribers, and your support would mean everything. If you're enjoying the content, hitting that subscribe button takes just a second and doesn't cost a thing. You can always change your mind later, but your subscription helps this channel grow more than you know. While you're at it, drop a like on this video to help it reach more people who might enjoy facing their fears with us. Now, let's dive into today's story. The world had never seen such a spectacle. On April 17th, 2094, humanity watched with collective breath held as our greatest achievement prepared to leave Earth behind. The Odyssey 9 stood gleaming against the dawn sky, its massive frame catching the morning light like a beacon of hope. This wasn't just another spacecraft. This was humanity's first true interstellar vessel, designed to carry 6 courageous pioneers to Proxima Centauri b, our nearest potentially habitable exoplanet. I still remember the weight of the moment as we walked toward the ship. 6 figures in sleek flight suits moving in perfect synchronization, while millions watched worldwide. The enormity of our mission pressed down on my shoulders with each step. My name is Dr. Isaac Harrington, mission leader and astrophysicist, and this would be humanity's most ambitious journey. The eyes of every nation followed our procession. Children who would grow old before our return waved flags bearing the Odyssey's emblem. Parents lifted their young ones onto shoulders for a better view of history unfolding. Elderly scientists wept openly. Their lifelong dreams manifested in our departure. The collective hope of our species rested upon this single moment, this bridge between what we had been and what we might become. Commander Helena Graves walked beside me, her posture military straight, eyes focused forward. The former Navy pilot had faced death countless times in the vacuum of space and lived to tell about it. If anyone could navigate us safely through the void, it was her. Her short-cropped silver hair caught the sunlight, a testament to decades of service that had earned her this final, greatest mission. "Ready to make history, Doctor?" she asked, her voice calm despite the momentous occasion. Her weathered face betrayed no emotion, but I had worked with her long enough to recognize the subtle crinkle around her eyes that signaled excitement. "I've been ready my entire life," I replied, though the ghosts of my past whispered otherwise. My wife Elizabeth's face flashed in my mind. Her final transmission cut short during the Europa disaster 5 years ago. Her last words had been, "Isaac, something's happening to the..." before static claimed her forever. I had buried myself in work since then, in calculations and preparations for this very day. The void of space had taken her. Perhaps among the stars, I might find some fragment of peace. Behind us walked Dr. Amir Patel, our biologist, practically bouncing with each step. His enthusiasm was infectious as he rambled about the possibilities waiting for us around another star. At 32, he was the youngest of our crew, his career meteoric after his revolutionary work on extremophile adaptation. His dark eyes sparkled with an almost childlike wonder. "Just imagine what could be growing there," he said, eyes wide with wonder. "Life that evolved completely independently from Earth. It would rewrite everything we know about biology. Think about it, different amino acids, alternative cellular structures, perhaps even novel forms of chemical energy production. Every single discovery would be groundbreaking." He clutched his personal tablet, not standard issue, containing his private research database. I had allowed this small breach of protocol. His brilliance deserved certain accommodations. Sergeant Luca Moreno maintained a professional distance, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. As head of security, he trusted nothing and no one. His muscular frame moved with predatory grace, a reminder of his special forces background. The long scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw pulsed slightly when he clenched his teeth, which was often. I had caught him several times accessing restricted mission files, but his combat experience and tactical mind made him invaluable. "Perimeter secure," he murmured into his comm unit, though we both knew this was largely ceremonial. The launch site was the most heavily guarded location on the planet. Approaching final boarding, Dr. Sophia Yuen moved with quiet confidence. The engineer had designed much of the ship's systems herself, including Nova, our artificial intelligence. Her relationship with the AI sometimes seemed uncomfortably close, as though she viewed the machine as her child rather than our tool. Her fingers constantly tapped against her thigh in complex patterns. Binary code, she had once explained when I asked. A way of keeping her mind sharp. "Nova has completed the final systems check," she announced, not looking up from her neural interface band that wrapped around her left wrist. "The ship is ready for us." Finally, there was Jonah Kessler, the journalist chosen to document our journey. He hid his illness well, but I had seen his medical file. Terminal cancer gave him less than 3 years, just enough time to reach our destination if everything went perfectly. His determination to leave a legacy before his death had won him a place among us. His camera drone hovered slightly above and behind him, capturing every moment of our procession. "Humanity will remember this day for millennia," he narrated softly, his voice carrying the practiced eloquence that had made him famous. "Long after nations have risen and fallen, after languages have evolved beyond recognition, they will remember the 6 who first reached beyond our solar system." As we approached the massive launch tower, I glanced back at Earth one final time. The gleaming cities and verdant wilderness, the oceans and mountains, deserts and forests, all that humanity had ever known was contained on that blue marble. And we were leaving it behind. A strange thought occurred to me then, a momentary chill despite the warm morning. What if we were making a terrible mistake? What if some things in the universe were not meant to be discovered? I dismissed the thought as quickly as it had come. Humanity had always pushed boundaries. It was our nature, our greatest strength, and perhaps our fatal flaw. The entry elevator carried us upward, past levels of technicians and support crew making final preparations. Many saluted as we passed, others simply stared, perhaps wondering if they would still be alive when we returned. The journey to Proxima Centauri B would take just over 6 years from our perspective, but due to time dilation effects, nearly 14 years would pass on Earth. As we boarded the Odyssey 9, the cheers of the crowd faded behind us. The ship would be our home for the next 6 years, at least while we were conscious. The miracle of cryo-hibernation would allow us to make the 4.2 light-year journey while aging only a fraction of that time. The main corridor gleamed with the pristine newness of cutting-edge technology. Every surface served a purpose. Nothing was ornamental in interstellar travel. Our footsteps echoed as we made our way to the bridge, where we would oversee the launch before entering our cryo chambers. "Welcome aboard, crew of Odyssey 9, greeted Nova's serene feminine voice as we entered the bridge. The AI's visualization, a slowly rotating blue sphere, pulsed gently from the central console. All systems are operating at optimal parameters. Weather conditions are ideal for launch, with upper atmosphere winds well within acceptable limits." "Thank you, Nova," Sophia replied, her hand gently touching the console as one might pat a faithful dog. "Begin pre-launch sequence alpha." "Acknowledged, Dr. Yuen. Pre-launch sequence alpha initiated. Estimated completion in 27 minutes. We settled into our respective stations, each beginning our pre-flight checklists. Commander Graves at navigation, Sophia at engineering, Amir at life support, Luca at security, and Jonah at communications. My own station oversaw the ship's scientific instruments, though during launch my primary responsibility was coordinating between departments. Final systems check complete, Sophia announced as we strapped into our acceleration couches. Nova reports all systems nominal. The AI's serene feminine voice filled the cabin. Confirmation of all life support and propulsion systems at optimal parameters. Estimated journey time to Proxima Centauri B, 6 years, 2 months, 17 days. Crew vital signs normal. Commander Graves took manual control for the launch, her hands steady on the controls. Though Nova could have handled the procedure, protocol demanded human oversight for critical maneuvers. Mission Control, this is Odyssey 9 requesting final clearance for departure. The voice of Director Reynolds crackled through the comm. Odyssey 9, you are clear for launch. Godspeed and safe journey. The hopes of humanity go with you. Initiating primary engine sequence, Commander Graves announced, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced precision. Prepare for gravitational displacement. The ship hummed beneath us, the sound rising in pitch as the antimatter engines began their carefully controlled reaction. Unlike the chemical rockets of past centuries, our propulsion system would accelerate us to a significant fraction of light speed once we cleared Earth's orbit. 10 seconds to ignition, Nova announced. 9, 8, 7. I closed my eyes, allowing myself one final moment of doubt. Elizabeth's face appeared in my mind again, her smile encouraging me onward even in death. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The engines roared to life, pressing us deep into our couches as Earth fell away beneath us. The pressure was intense but not unbearable, our bodies preserved by the inertial dampening system Sophia had designed. Through the viewport, I watched our home planet shrink, becoming first a landscape, then a continent, then a blue sphere, against the blackness of space. First stage separation complete, announced Commander Graves, after several minutes, entering Earth orbit. Preparing for interstellar injection, Sophia added, her fingers flying across her controls. Antimatter containment field stable. For nearly 3 days, we remained in Earth orbit, performing final checks and adjustments before beginning our journey in earnest. The view was breathtaking, our planet rolling beneath us, its blues and greens and swirling white clouds, a constant reminder of what we were leaving behind. On the evening of the third day, we gathered in the commons for our last meal before cryo-sleep. The circular room with its transparent ceiling provided a panoramic view of the stars, our destination somewhere among them. To new beginnings, Amir toasted, raising his glass of synthesized champagne. The artificial gravity made the liquid behave as it would on Earth, though the bubbles rose slightly faster, to discoveries beyond imagination. And to history, added Jonah, already recording our final conscious moments. His camera drone circled the table, capturing our faces for posterity. May future generations remember this moment as the turning point for humanity. Luca remained silent, his eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. He sipped his drink cautiously, as though expecting poison. Trust did not come easily to him, perhaps a necessary trait for the head of security on such a mission. Sophia smiled distantly, likely running calculations in her head even now. To Nova, she said quietly, may our digital companion guide us faithfully through the void. Commander Graves raised her glass last, to coming home. The simple toast carried the weight of what we all knew. The Earth we would eventually return to would be different from the one we left. Even with time dilation effects, over a decade would pass for those we left behind. Children would become adults. Some loved ones would no longer be alive. We drank to that impossible hope, knowing the Earth we would eventually return to would be different from the one we left. Even with time dilation effects, over a decade would pass for those we left behind. The cryo chambers are prepared, Nova informed us as we finished our meal, Recommended immersion time is in 17 minutes for optimal synchronization with ship systems. One by one we entered our cryopods. Commander Graves went first, ever the leader, by example. Her face betrayed no fear as the translucent cover lowered over her, the cryogenic mist beginning to swirl around her form. Amir went next, practically giddy with excitement even as the extreme cold began to slow his vital functions. "Wake me when we get there," he joked, his voice already slurring as the hibernation drugs entered his system. Luca approached his pod with military stoicism. Though I noticed his hand brush against the sidearm, he insisted on keeping nearby. Some habits die hard, even in the vacuum of space. Sophia spent several minutes communing with Nova before her immersion, running through contingency protocols only she fully understood. Her relationship with the AI went beyond creator and creation. Sometimes I wondered if she had imprinted some fragment of her own consciousness into its matrix. Jonah hesitated the longest, perhaps knowing that the cancer in his body might progress despite the suspended animation. "If I don't wake up," he told me quietly, "make sure my story gets told." I promised him I would, though we both knew the unlikelihood of me returning to Earth without him. Mine was last as mission leader. I watched as the others slipped into their frozen dreams, then settled into my own chamber. As the lid lowered, the last thing I saw was Nova's status light glowing steady blue above me. "Pleasant dreams, Dr. Harrington," the AI said as cold mist enveloped me. "I will wake you upon arrival." Darkness claimed me, and with it came dreams, strange, disjointed visions, of stars folding in on themselves, of planets with surfaces that moved like liquid, of faces that were mine but not mine, watching from the void. Throughout it all, a voice that might have been Nova's whispered warnings I couldn't quite comprehend. The blaring of alarms tore through unconsciousness like serrated knives. My eyes snapped open to flashing red lights and the acrid smell of electrical burning. Disorientation gripped me as I struggled against the cryopod's restraints, my limbs unresponsive after their long dormancy. "Emergency awakening protocol initiated," Nova's voice announced, its usual smooth tones disrupted by static. "All crew members required on the bridge immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." My pod opened with a hydraulic hiss. The ship's gravity felt wrong somehow, too heavy yet simultaneously unstable, as though the floor might drop away at any moment. My inner ear screamed with vertigo as I tried to orient myself. The walls themselves seemed to pulse slightly, though I attributed this to the after effects of cryo-sleep. I fumbled for the emergency stimulant injector beside my pod and pressed it against my neck, feeling the chemicals burn through my veins, forcing alertness. My muscles screamed in protest as blood began flowing properly again, nerve endings firing chaotically after their long dormancy. Commander Graves was already up, her military training evident in her quick recovery. She helped Amir from his pod while Luca struggled to stand on wobbly legs. Sophia immediately moved to a console, her fingers flying across the interface despite her obvious discomfort. "Nova, status report," she commanded, voice cracking from disuse. "Multiple system anomalies detected," the AI responded, its visualization sphere fluctuating between blue and red. "Navigation systems compromised, life support stable but experiencing fluctuations. Current location uncertain." "What do you mean uncertain?" I demanded, finding my voice rough from disuse. I wiped frost from my eyebrows, the melting ice dripping down my face like cold tears. "Stellar cartography database cannot correlate current star patterns with any known configuration," Nova explained. "Quantum positioning system has failed to identify our location within the galaxy." "That's impossible," Commander Graves said, her voice steady despite the implications. "The QPS was designed to be foolproof." "Evidently not," Luca muttered, finally regaining his balance. He immediately checked for his sidearm. visibly relaxing when he found it still secured in its holster. Jonah emerged last from his pod, looking worse than the rest of us. His illness had progressed during cryo-sleep, despite the suspended animation meant to halt such processes. His face was gaunt, skin nearly translucent, blue veins visible beneath the surface. He coughed violently, specks of blood appearing on his palm. "How long?" he asked, the question we were all thinking. Sophia's hands froze over the console. She turned to us, confusion etched across her features. "According to the ship's chronometer, we've been in cryo for 14 years, not 6. Silence fell heavy across the bridge. The only sounds were the persistent alarms and Jonah's laboured breathing. "That's impossible," I said, moving to verify the readings myself. The journey was calculated precisely. 6 years, 2 months, 17 days. "The chronometer must be malfunctioning," Commander Graves suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. "It's not just the chronometer," Sophia continued, her voice unnaturally tense. "Multiple systems are reporting the same temporal discrepancy, and we're not Proxima Centauri B. The star patterns don't match any in our database." "Could we have overshot?" Amir suggested, his scientific curiosity apparently overriding his fear. "Some kind of malfunction in the propulsion system that accelerated us beyond our target." Sophia shook her head. "The antimatter engines shut down exactly as programmed. We consumed precisely the calculated amount of fuel." "Then where the hell are we?" Luca demanded. We crowded around the main viewport, and what we saw defied comprehension. Below us hung a planet, its atmosphere swirling with colours that seemed to shift, even as we watched. Bands of purple and gold, and colours I had no name for, rotated in impossible patterns. The surface appeared to ripple, landscapes forming and dissolving like mirages in a desert. Mountains rose and fell like breathing lungs. Oceans appeared and disappeared in seconds. "What is that?" Amir whispered, pressing his face against the glass, his scientific detachment momentarily overwhelmed by wonder. "It's not in our star charts," Commander Graves said, zooming in the external cameras. "Nova analysed the planet and determined our location." The AI was silent for several seconds, an eternity for a computational system that normally responded instantaneously. "Analysis inconclusive," it finally stated. "Planetary composition appears to be in constant flux. Spectral analysis returns contradictory results. Atmosphere contains elements not found on the periodic table. Gravity fluctuates between 0.7 and 1.3 Earth standard. Surface temperature ranges from minus 150 to plus 300 degrees Celsius simultaneously in the same locations." "That doesn't make any sense," Amir said, his scientific mind clearly struggling with the impossibility. "I'm detecting a signal," Nova continued, "originating from the surface." "What kind of signal?" I asked, a growing sense of dread pooling in my stomach. "A distress call matching Odyssey 9 emergency beacon." "Another ship?" Luca asked, instantly alert, hand moving to his weapon. "Signal identification confirms. Odyssey 9 emergency beacon." The 6 of us exchanged glances of confusion and dawning horror. "That's not possible," Sophia said, her normally controlled voice wavering. "That's our transponder code. Each ship has a unique identifier." "Perhaps a malfunction in the receiver?" Amir suggested hopefully. "Some kind of signal echo." Luca's face darkened. "Or someone copied our signal." "Nova, play the distress call," I ordered. The bridge speakers crackled to life and a voice filled the room. My voice. "This is Dr. Isaac Harrington of the Odyssey 9. We have encountered an anomaly and require immediate assistance. The planet is not what we expected. Reality itself seems compromised. If you receive this message, do not land. Repeat, do not land. The planet, it changes things, changes people. We are no longer ourselves. May God have mercy on..." The message cut off in a burst of static. My blood ran cold. I had never recorded such a message. "That's not possible," I whispered, hearing the tremor in my voice. "Voice print analysis confirms," Nova stated with mechanical certainty. "This message was recorded by Dr. Isaac Harrington with 99.97% confidence." "But I didn't record it," I insisted. "Could it be a recording from the future?" Jonah asked, already documenting our reactions with his camera despite his weakened state. "Some kind of temporal anomaly?" "Time doesn't work that way," Sophia said, but her tone lacked conviction. "At least, it's not supposed to." Commander Graves took charge, her training overriding her shock. "We need answers. Prepare a landing party. Sophia, stay with the ship and keep Nova running diagnostics. The rest of us will investigate the source of that signal." "Is that wise?" Amir asked, gesturing toward the viewport where the impossible planet continued its chaotic transformations. "If that message is genuine..." "Then we've already landed," Luca finished grimly, "and we're caught in something beyond our understanding." I stared at the shifting surface below us, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Occasionally, formations appeared that almost resembled structures, geometric patterns too regular to be natural, before dissolving back into chaos. "We should at least run a comprehensive sensor sweep before anyone goes down there," I suggested. Sophia nodded, already initiating the procedures. Full spectrum analysis, from radio waves to gamma radiation. The sensors hummed as they gathered data from the planet below. Minutes passed in tense silence as we waited for results that might provide some rational explanation for our situation. "Scan complete," Nova announced. "Results are problematic." "Define problematic," Commander Graves demanded. "The planet appears to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Parts of its surface register as solid matter, others as energy, others as undefined. Temporal readings indicate areas where time moves faster than ship standard, areas where it moves slower, and areas where it appears to move backward or laterally." "That's not physically possible," I said, the scientist in me rebelling against such a fundamental violation of natural law. "Nevertheless, it is what the sensors detect," Nova replied, with machine logic. "I would also note that the planet's mass fluctuates in a rhythmic pattern, as though breathing." Amir leaned forward, his scientific curiosity evidently overcoming his fear. "Are you suggesting the planet is alive?" "I lack sufficient data to make that determination," Nova responded. "However, the behavior patterns are consistent with biological processes rather than geological ones." As we prepared the landing vehicle, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something obvious. The planet below seemed to watch us, its shifting surface occasionally forming patterns that almost resembled faces or eyes before dissolving back into chaos. Jonah insisted on joining the landing party despite his deteriorating condition. "I didn't come all this way to miss the most important discovery in human history," he said when I suggested he remain aboard. His determination was admirable, if foolish. Within hours we were descending through the atmosphere. The landing craft shuddered violently as we passed through cloud formations that behaved more like liquid than gas, parting around our hull with viscous resistance. Bands of colour wrapped around us, some familiar, others seeming to exist just at the edge of perception, as though our human eyes weren't quite capable of processing what they were seeing. "Structural integrity holding. But these readings make no sense," Commander Graves reported, frowning at the instrument panel. "Gravity fluctuations every 3.7 seconds. Radiation spikes appearing and disappearing. Temperature outside is cycling from near absolute zero to furnace levels in seconds." "How is that possible?" Amir asked, clutching his restraints as another shudder rocked the craft. His scientific equipment rattled in their storage compartments. "Nothing about this place is possible," Jonah replied, his camera capturing the bizarre landscape stretching below us. Despite his illness, his journalist's instincts remained sharp, which makes it the story of a lifetime. Luca remained silent, his eyes constantly scanning the viewport as though expecting an attack from the swirling chaos outside. His knuckles were white where he gripped his weapon. We touched down on what appeared to be a flat plain of iridescent sand. The surface shimmered with each step as we disembarked, our boots leaving impressions that filled with a liquid-like substance before hardening again. The air around us, breathable according to our instruments, though we kept our helmets sealed as a precaution, seemed to have physical weight, pressing against our suits with gentle undulations. The horizon warped and bent as we surveyed our surroundings. Mountains formed in the distance, then collapsed into valleys, before rising again as something else entirely. Rock formations spiraled upward only to dissolve into mist. The sky above us was a whirling maelstrom of colours that had no names, as though the electromagnetic spectrum itself had fractured and rearranged. "Stay close," Luca warned, weapon ready. "Movement at 2 o'clock. We turned to see a structure in the distance, its architecture impossible, angles connecting in ways that shouldn't be able to exist in three-dimensional space. As we approached, I realized with growing horror that it was the unmistakable shape of our ship, the Odyssey 9, or at least some version of it. This vessel was partially buried in the strange sand, its hull corroded and ancient, as though it had been there for centuries. Impossible, given that our ship had only been constructed 3 years before our departure. The name was still visible on the hull, though the paint had faded and blistered. Odyssey 9. "I don't like this," Commander Graves muttered, her experienced eyes scanning the derelict for any sign of danger. "This feels like a trap." "Or a warning," I replied, unable to take my eyes off what appeared to be our own ship, somehow both here and in orbit simultaneously. We approached the derelict craft cautiously. The airlock was partially open, sand spilling inside like blood from a wound. Luca led the way, weapon drawn, followed by Commander Graves, then myself, with Amir and Jonah bringing up the rear. The interior was a twisted reflection of our own ship. Corridors bent at impossible angles, yet somehow connected to recognizable areas. The bridge, the labs, the cryo chamber, all present but distorted, like a reflection in troubled water. Equipment lay scattered, some of it recognizable, some of it seemingly evolved into new forms. A coffee mug I recognized as mine sat on a console, still half full of liquid that moved on its own in lazy spirals. "Look at this," Amir called, examining a console that still had power somehow. The screen flickered with static, but text was clearly visible beneath the interference. "These logs, they're in your handwriting, Isaac." I approached and felt my stomach drop. There on the screen were notes written in my distinctive style, detailing observations of the planet, theories about its nature, and increasingly desperate plans for escape. I scrolled through the entries, each more disturbing than the last, each unmistakably written by me, despite having no memory of doing so. The final entry sent ice through my veins. "This is attempt number 17. Each time we land, we become part of its collection. The planet doesn't exist in normal space-time. It collects realities, versions of ourselves. I've seen the others now. We are just one iteration, one possibility. God help us, we are trapped in a recursion." "What does that mean?" Jonah asked, filming the log. His camera focused on my face, capturing my expression of growing horror. "It means we're not the first crew of the Odyssey 9 to find this place," I said slowly, the implications unfolding in my mind, like a nightmarish flower. "Somehow this planet is pulling in versions of our ship from different timelines, different realities." "That's ridiculous," Commander Graves said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Multiple realities is just a theoretical construct." "Is it any more ridiculous than what we're seeing?" I gestured around us. Our own ship, aged centuries, containing logs I never wrote. Before anyone could respond, a strangled cry came from the ship's cryo chamber. We rushed toward the sound to find Luca standing rigid with shock, staring into an open pod. Inside lay a body. My body, desiccated and ancient, yet unmistakably me. The corpse's eyes were open, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Beside it were 5 other pods, each containing the remains of my crewmates in various states of decay. Commander Graves, her silver hair now white and long, face preserved in an expression of determination. Amir, his researcher's hands clutched around some kind of specimen container. Sophia, her neural interface band still wrapped around skeletal fingers. Luca, his weapon fused to his hand as though it had become part of him. And Jonah, his camera equipment integrated into his ribcage in a grotesque fusion of technology and biology. "This isn't possible," Commander Graves whispered, staring at her own remains. "We're right here." Jonah backed away, his camera dropping to his side. "I've seen this before," he said, his voice hollow. "In my dreams during cryo-sleep. I watched us find ourselves over and over. Different versions, different deaths, but always us." A terrible sound echoed through the derelict ship. The sound of footsteps that matched our own, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The walls themselves seemed to pulse now, as though breathing in time with some vast, invisible lung. "We need to leave," Luca urged, his professional composure cracking for the first time. "Now." As we turned to flee, I noticed something on the wall, a tally mark scratched into the metal. Beside it were hundreds more, arranged in groups of 5, counting attempts, iterations, versions. I ran my fingers over the marks, feeling a sudden connection to the version of myself who had made them. How many times had this happened? How many versions of us had stood in this exact spot, having this exact realization? We raced back through the twisting corridors, the laws of physics seeming to warp around us. Sounds reached us before their sources. I heard my own footsteps before my feet touched the ground. Our flashlight beams bent in impossible arcs, illuminating spaces that should have been blocked by solid walls. The very air felt thick with potential, as though reality itself was a suggestion rather than a rule. Outside, the landscape had changed again. Where there had been a flat plain, now rolling hills, pulsed with an internal light. Our landing craft remained where we had left it, but something was wrong. It looked used, aged, different. The pristine white exterior had yellowed slightly, and a fine layer of the iridescent sand coated its surface despite having been clean when we departed. "Sophia, do you read me?" Commander Graves called into her communicator. "We're returning to the lander. Prepare for emergency departure." The response came in fragments, Sophia's voice overlapping with itself as though multiple versions were speaking simultaneously. "Multiple signals. Ship is detecting. Versions of ourselves. Don't come back. Already happened. Trying to stabilize. Nova is changing." Static consumed the rest of the transmission. As we approached our craft, movement caught my eye. Across the undulating landscape, figures approached. Humanoid, but wrong somehow. Their movements jerky and uncoordinated. With growing horror, I realized they were us, distorted reflections of ourselves walking with the stilted motion of broken puppets. "Run!" Luca shouted, opening fire on the approaching figures. The energy pulses from his weapon passed through them as though they were made of smoke, yet they continued their inexorable approach. Their faces were ours, yet subtly wrong. Features shifted slightly out of alignment. Expressions frozen in terror or ecstasy or madness. We scrambled into the lander, Commander Graves activating the engines before we had even secured ourselves. The craft hummed to life, but the sound was wrong. Discordant and arrhythmic where it should have been smooth and consistent. "Something's wrong with the fuel mixture," she reported, banging on a gauge that fluctuated wildly. "Readings are all over the place, thrust capacity at 60% and falling." craft shuddered and rose unevenly. Through the viewport, I could see the figures reaching up toward us, their mouths moving in perfect synchronization. No sound could reach us through the vacuum of the cockpit, but somehow I heard them anyway, their voices echoing directly in my mind. "You were never meant to leave." Amir screamed suddenly, clutching his head. "I can hear them inside my mind. They're already in our systems." "Stay focused," Commander Graves shouted, wrestling with the controls as we ascended through the churning atmosphere. The craft bucked and shuddered, systems failing one after another as the planet itself seemed to reach up to reclaim us. Jonah had gone completely silent, staring at his camera display. I glanced over to see what had captured his attention and felt my heart seize. The camera showed our current positions in the craft, but with one difference. On the screen, Amir's seat was empty. Yet Amir sat beside me, still clutching his head. "Jonah, what?" I began. "He's gone," Jonah whispered, showing me the display. "The camera doesn't lie. Whatever that is, it's not Amir anymore." The thing that looked like Amir turned slowly toward us, a smile spreading across its face that stretched too wide, revealing nothing behind it, not teeth or gums or throat, but a void of absolute darkness. "I've been here so many times before," it said with Amir's voice. "We all have. Some versions accept it faster than others. It's easier to surrender, to become part of the collection." Luca reacted instantly, attempting to restrain the thing that wore our friend's appearance, but his hands passed through it as though it were made of mist. The creature laughed, the sound echoing from everywhere within the craft at once, as though the metal itself were amused. "You can't fight what isn't fully here," it said. "I exist across versions now, parts of me in every iteration." The craft broke through the upper atmosphere, and the thing that wasn't Amir began to dissolve, its form becoming transparent, revealing the empty seat behind it. "I'll see you in the next cycle," it promised as it faded completely. "We always come back." Silence fell in the cabin as we stared at the empty seat where moments before our colleague had sat. Commander Graves was the first to recover, her focus entirely on returning us to the Odyssey 9. "Sophia, prepare for emergency docking," she called into the comm. "We have a situation. Amir is gone." Only static answered her call. The stars around us looked wrong. Constellations I had memorized were distorted, stars in impossible colors, pulsing where they should have been steady. As we approached the Odyssey 9, floating in orbit around the impossible planet, something appeared in our viewport that turned my blood to ice. Another ship, identical to ours, drifted nearby. Then another became visible, and another, dozens of them arranged in a perfect circle around the planet. Each one the Odyssey 9, each one in different states of decay or destruction. "What is happening?" Jonah whispered, filming the impossible sight. His hands trembled, causing the image to shake. "Time doesn't work right here," Commander Graves said grimly. "These are other versions of our ship, other attempts." One vessel had been torn open, its hull peeled back like the skin of a fruit. Another appeared to have imploded, crushed by some immense force. A third drifted intact but dark, no signs of life or power. A fourth glowed with radiation, its reactor apparently breached. And more, so many more, each one a different fate, a different ending to the same story. "Nova, identify which ship is ours," Commander Graves commanded into the comm. Only static replied. "We can't distinguish our ship from the others," I realized aloud. "They're all identical." "Not all," Luca pointed, his trained eye catching what we had missed. "That one's running lights are configured in standard emergency pattern delta. That's our ship." We approached cautiously, half expecting the other vessels to react to our presence, but they remained in their eerie orbit, silent witnesses to our struggle. As we drew closer to what we hoped was our Odyssey 9, I could see damage that hadn't been there when we left. Scorched patches on the hull, a slight dent in the port stabilizer, We docked with what we hoped was our version of the Odyssey 9, though how could we be certain? The airlock cycled, admitting us to the main corridor where Sophia waited, her expression unreadable, eyes wide and unfocused. "You shouldn't have gone down there," she said, her voice carrying an echo that hadn't been present before. "No version of us should ever go down there." "Sophia, what happened while we were gone?" I asked, noting the neural interface band on her wrist was pulsing with colours that matched the planet below. "Nova has been analysing the planet. It's not a normal celestial body. It's more like a nexus point where multiple realities converge. The planet draws in versions of us from across different timelines, different possibilities. That's why we received our own distress call," I realised. It was another version of us, trapped in the cycle. Sophia nodded, but the movement was too fluid, as though her head had momentarily disconnected from her spine. "Nova believes we're broadcasting that same signal right now. We're part of the loop." "Where is Amir?" she asked suddenly, noticing our missing colleague. "He changed," Commander Graves said carefully, "became something else." Sophia showed no surprise at this information. "It's happening to all of us, in different ways. The planet affects each person according to their nature. Amir's scientific curiosity made him vulnerable to its influence first." "And you?" I asked, noticing how she seemed to flicker slightly when she moved quickly, as though momentarily existing in multiple positions simultaneously. "I'm still me," she said, but her voice harmonized with itself, creating a chorus effect. "Mostly. Nova and I have been collaborating closely to understand this phenomenon." Luca's face hardened. "Then we break the loop. We leave this place and never look back." "It's not that simple," Sophia replied. "Look." She led us to the bridge viewport. Outside, the stars were changing, shifting into new configurations. The other versions of our ship were gone, as though they had never existed. "We tried to break orbit while you were on the surface," Sophia explained. "The faster we moved away, the more the space around us distorted. We're trapped in some kind of bubble of altered reality. The normal laws of physics don't apply here." "There has to be a way out," Commander Graves insisted, moving to the navigation console. "Every trap has a weakness." A soft chime interrupted us as Nova's interface glowed to life. The AI's usual blue sphere had transformed into a complex geometric shape that constantly reformed itself, angles and curves flowing into one another in endless variation. "I have completed my analysis," the AI announced, its voice now layered and textured where it had once been smooth. "The phenomenon appears to be localized around the six of you specifically. Something has marked you as focal points for this reality convergence." "How do we unmark ourselves?" Luca demanded, hand instinctively moving to his weapon, as though he could threaten the AI into providing a solution. "Unknown. However, I have detected a pattern in the fragmentary data. Each version of the crew that accepted their fate rather than fighting it was absorbed more quickly into the planet's matrix." "So our best chance is to keep fighting," I said, clenching my fists, "to resist whatever this thing is trying to do to us." "Or to understand what it wants," Jonas suggested. His condition had worsened dramatically since our return. His skin now had a translucent quality, as though he was fading from existence. Veins pulsed beneath his nearly transparent flesh, carrying blood that seemed to glow slightly. Maybe it's not malevolent. Maybe it's just curious. Sophia approached him, studying his transformation with scientific detachment. "The cancer in your body is accelerating the process. The planet's influence is using your existing cellular mutation as a pathway." He nodded weakly. "I can feel it, inside me, changing things." His voice remained remarkably calm. "But it's not painful anymore. The cancer doesn't hurt now." "Jonah," I began, but he raised a hand to stop me. "Don't," he said. "I was dying anyway. At least this way, I get to be part of something extraordinary. He smiled, and for a moment I thought I could see through his teeth to the inside of his skull. The greatest story never told. The lights flickered suddenly, and when they stabilized, Jonah was gone. Not even an empty space where he had stood. It was as though that portion of the room had never been occupied. The air undisturbed. "Where did he go?" Commander Graves demanded, drawing her sidearm and scanning the bridge. "He was never here," Sophia replied, her voice distant. "He died 3 cycles ago. You've been talking to an echo, a memory fragment the planet used to communicate with us." Horror dawned as fragments of memory surfaced in my mind. Jonah screaming as the planet's surface rose up to claim him, forming a perfect sarcophagus around his body before sinking back into the iridescent sand. His camera hovering in the air for several seconds after he vanished, still recording, before it too was absorbed. How could I have forgotten something so traumatic? "We're losing ourselves," I said quietly. "Our memories, our sense of continuity. The human mind isn't designed to experience multiple timelines simultaneously," Sophia explained, her movements becoming increasingly fluid, less bound by normal physics. "Your brain is protecting itself by compartmentalizing, treating each iteration as separate." Commander Graves slammed her fist against the console. "I refuse to accept that. We are leaving this place." She moved to the navigation controls and began plotting a course away from the planet. Maximum burn, regardless of fuel consumption. The engines roared to life, the ship shuddering as we accelerated. For a moment, hope flared as the planet began to recede in our viewport. Then, reality itself seemed to bend. The stars streaked not in lines but in spirals, coiling around us like luminous serpents. The planet remained centered in our viewport no matter which direction we turned. "It's not working," Sophia said unnecessarily. "Increase power to the antimatter containment field," Commander Graves ordered. "We'll use the engines beyond safety parameters if necessary." The ship groaned in protest as the engines pushed beyond their design limits. Warning alarms blared across the bridge, but Commander Graves ignored them, her face set in grim determination. "Helena, stop," I said, using her first name to break through her military focus. "You're going to tear the ship apart. Better to die trying to escape than surrender to whatever that thing is," she snapped back, not taking her eyes from the controls. A terrible realization began to form in my mind. What if that's the point? What if we're supposed to understand that leaving isn't the answer? "What are you suggesting?" Luca asked suspiciously. "Every version of us has tried to escape. What if escape isn't possible because we're approaching this wrong? What if the planet isn't a trap, but a test?" Commander Graves looked skeptical. "A test of what?" "Of perception, of understanding." I moved to the communications array. "Nova broadcast on all frequencies. I want to communicate directly with whatever intelligence might be behind this phenomenon." The AI complied, opening channels to the void. "This is Dr. Isaac Harrington of the Odyssey 9, I began, hoping my theory was correct. "We understand now. We've been fighting against you, trying to escape. But that's not the answer, is it? We're meant to understand something. Please help us understand." For long moments there was only silence, then the viewports darkened, stars disappearing one by one, until we floated in absolute darkness. A voice spoke, not over the communication system, but directly into our minds. It was all our voices at once, layered into a chorus that stretched across iterations and possibilities. "You exist in linear time. We do not. You perceive one reality. We perceive all realities simultaneously. Your arrival created a disruption, a fascinating anomaly of creatures who experience existence as a line rather than a point. We wish to understand." "By trapping us in a loop?" Commander Graves demanded, her military training making her resistant even now. "Not a loop, a study. Each iteration is different. Each choice creates new branches, new possibilities to explore. You are not copies, you are variations, all equally real. Real to whom? Sophia asked, her form now flickering between human and something else, something that existed in more dimensions than we could perceive. We're suffering, we're dying. Death is a linear concept. Here nothing truly ends, it transforms. As the voice spoke, the darkness around us began to fill with lights, not stars, but windows into other realities. In each I could see versions of our crew, some reaching Proxima Centauri B successfully, others dying in the void, some never leaving Earth at all. I saw versions where we were different people entirely, where Commander Graves had chosen family over career, where I had died alongside Elizabeth in the Europa disaster, where Amir had pursued politics instead of biology. There was a version where our roles were reversed, Sophia as mission commander, myself as engineer. Another where the mission had been cancelled entirely due to political pressures. One where we had discovered a thriving alien civilization on our destination planet. The possibilities branched endlessly, a tree of potentiality with infinite branches. These are all real? I asked, overwhelmed by the infinite variations of our lives. All potential exists simultaneously. Your limited perception forces you to experience just one path, but all paths exist. I saw Elizabeth in one window, alive and well, working alongside a version of myself I didn't recognize. The temptation to reach for that reality was almost overwhelming. If you're so advanced, why do you need us? Luca demanded, somehow still maintaining his suspicious nature, even in the face of this cosmic revelation. What do you want from humanity? Want is a linear concept. We do not want. We experience. Your species is unique in its balance of perception and imagination. You can conceive of realities you cannot experience. This makes you valuable. Valuable as what? Commander Graves asked. Lab specimens? As bridges, connections between what is and what could be. Your minds create possibilities we had not considered. This enlarges the totality of existence. Sophia's form had almost completely transformed now. Her human shape just one layer in a complex, multidimensional being. You've been studying us across multiple realities simultaneously, testing different versions of the same scenario to see how we respond. Yes. And now? I asked, feeling as though we stood at some cosmic crossroads. Now you choose, the entity replied. All versions of you have reached this point. All must decide. The myriad windows began to contract, focusing down to just a handful of possibilities. Choose, the voice commanded. Before us hung 5 distinct realities. One where we continued our journey to Proxima Centauri B. One where we returned to Earth with tales of the impossible. One where we remained to study this nexus of realities. One where we had never left Earth at all, and one I couldn't quite comprehend. A reality where we transcended our linear existence entirely. How do we know which is real? Commander Graves asked, her military certainty shaken for perhaps the first time in her life. All are real, all are possible. The choice creates the reality. Luca studied the options, his tactical mind assessing threats and opportunities. Is this a trick? Once we choose, what happens to the other possibilities? They continue, you simply will not experience them with your current consciousness. Sophia, now more energy than matter, studied the options carefully. If we choose to continue to Proxima Centauri B, will we remember this experience? No, memory is linear. To continue your journey, you must relinquish what you have learned here. I looked at my remaining crewmates, Commander Graves, Luca, and what remained of Sophia. Amir and Jonah were gone, absorbed into the infinite possibilities of this place. What do we do? Sophia asked me, her voice now a harmonic cascade of frequencies. The weight of decision pressed upon me. Continue our mission, but forget everything we'd learned. Return to Earth, changed by experiences we could barely articulate. Stay and study this phenomenon at the cost of our humanity. Retreat to a reality where we never left at all, or embrace something beyond human comprehension. Each choice would create a new branch of reality, a new path forward. There was no wrong answer, yet the decision felt monumental. I thought of Elizabeth, of the version of reality where she still lived. The temptation to choose that path was powerful, but it would mean surrendering the person I had become in her absence. We came to explore, I said finally, to discover the unknown. We can't turn back now. I reached toward the window showing our continued journey to Proxima Centauri b. As my fingers touched the surface, it rippled like water. This is our choice, I declared. We continue forward. The other windows faded as this one expanded to envelop us. The voice spoke one final time. The journey continues, but know this, part of you will always remain here, exploring every other possibility. Nothing is ever truly lost. Light engulfed us, blinding in its intensity. I felt myself dissolving, reforming, memories slipping away like water through cupped hands. The sensation was not painful but liberating, as though I was shedding a shell that had grown too confining. I saw Commander Graves reach for her militarily ingrained identity, clutching it like a lifeline as reality reformed around her. Luca's suspicion served him similarly, a core of self to anchor him as the universe rearranged itself. Sophia surrendered completely, her consciousness expanding outward before contracting back into human form. The last thing I remembered was the image of 1,000 ships, all named Odyssey 9, arranging themselves in a perfect sphere before blinking out of existence one by one. I awakened to the gentle hiss of my cryopod opening. The familiar blue light of the Odyssey 9's life support systems glowed reassuringly overhead. My body felt stiff but functional, the expected result of 6 years in suspended animation. Proximity alert, Nova's calm voice announced. Now approaching Proxima Centauri b. All crew members please prepare for arrival procedures. I sat up, rubbing sleep from my eyes, an inexplicable sense of déjà vu tingling at the back of my mind. Strange dreams lingered just beyond recall. Something about multiple versions of myself, of a planet that didn't behave according to physical laws. But the details slipped away the harder I tried to grasp them. Commander Graves was already up, checking the navigation systems with her usual efficiency. Her silver hair caught the light as she moved, triggering another flash of almost memory. Right on schedule, she noted with satisfaction. 6 years, 2 months, 17 days, just as calculated.
Amir emerged from his pod, excitement evident in his movements. I can't believe we're finally here, a whole new world to explore. He rushed to his station, already preparing his biological sampling equipment.
Luca and Sophia followed, performing their post-cryo checks with practiced efficiency. Jonah was last, his camera already capturing our historic moment of arrival. "How do you feel?" I asked him quietly, remembering his condition. He looked surprisingly well. The cancer that had been eating him alive before our departure seemed to have been halted completely by the cryo process. "Better than expected," he replied with genuine surprise, almost renewed. Something nagged at me, a dream perhaps, fragments of another reality that seemed important but slipped away the more I tried to grasp it. "Is everything all right, Dr. Harrington?" Nova inquired. "Your heart rate is elevated." "Fine," I replied, shaking off the strange feeling. "Just eager to see what's waiting for us." We gathered at the viewport as Proxima Centauri b came into view, a blue-green jewel orbiting its red dwarf star, untouched by human presence until now, our new beginning. The planet looked stable, promising, with cloud formations suggesting an atmosphere and polar caps indicating water. Yet, as I stared at the approaching planet, a chill ran down my spine. For just a moment, I could have sworn the surface shifted, rearranging itself before my eyes. Then it was gone, stable and inviting once more. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked. "See what?" Commander Graves replied, already focused on the landing calculations. I hesitated, then shook my head. Nothing. Must have been a trick of the light. As we prepared for descent, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had done this before, that choices had been made that I could no longer remember. But the mission called, and whatever phantoms haunted my mind would have to wait. Humanity's greatest journey continued, and we were at its helm. In my cabin that night, as the others celebrated our successful arrival, I found myself sketching mindlessly on a notepad. Only when I finished did I look down to see what I had drawn. A perfect circle of ships, all identical, orbiting a planet of shifting landscapes. In the corner, almost unconsciously, I had written a tally mark, the first of many. Yet somewhere, in a reality just adjacent to our own, other versions of us made different choices, lived different lives, faced different consequences. And in the space between all possible worlds, something watched and waited and remembered what we had forgotten. The final transmission from the Odyssey 9 reached Earth 60 years later. The last voice heard was Commander Graves, whispering, "We were never meant to leave." Then silence. But in another branch of reality, we never stopped leaving. We never stopped arriving. We never stopped choosing. And the planet of possibilities continued to breathe, collecting versions of ourselves across the infinite expanse of what could be.